Welcome to the Contemporary Music Centre's Salon, our first episode for the winter season of our online Salon series, and a very special episode as we officially launch and celebrate the new release from CMC composer Ian Wilson, Wild is the Wind, on the Diatribe record label. A very warm welcome to you, Ian, and delighted that we're launching this release this evening, this new release from you on the Diatribe label, and delighted that we're also joined by two wonderful saxophonists, Cathal Roche and Mellema, and who are featured very strongly on this new release from you, Ian. And I think it's safe to say, Ian, but correct me if I'm wrongly, that this is kind of a concept album from you. I mean, built around wind instruments, as you say, the saxophone very prominent in a number of pieces. And as you explain in your notes, examining the world through music, most especially, I suppose, current issues that are close to you in terms of your thoughts at the moment, both political and ecological. And I suppose I'm struck by that you know, your very honest admission to that in the program notes. And, you know, as an artist, do you feel a moral obligation to explore, you know, issues through your art? I mean, a lot of composers do not feel that.
I'm not sure if moral obligation is the right phrase for me, but certainly I don't feel it's possible for me to ignore anymore what goes on around us in terms of the state of our world, either ecologically or politically. They just, you know, those things, they do impinge on everyone, or at least most of us now. It's something that I want to engage with musically, partly for myself, partly depending on the piece and on the project, where that can maybe speak to other people in a way as well. But often these things are just a way of expressing how one feels about something. Music has always been that vehicle for me, and there's always been you know, different subjects over the years, or different things that have been on my mind or I've wanted to explore. Just so happens now that the ecological or environmental situation and the politics around us are just a couple of the things that I'm starting to explore, along with other things as well.
As I mentioned, you know, it's spanning a number of years, the pieces on it, and it's a collaboration or an extension of very close musical partnerships that you have with the ensembles that are featured here, Hard Rain Soloist Ensemble and Rodney, and the soloists featured here, two of which we're delighted to have with us for the launch this evening, Cathal and Tees. You know, this close kind of partnership between performers and composers, Ian, it's essential, really, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I've been very fortunate over my career to have a number of such relationships, and they're very valuable. But not just musically, you know, personally, I would count Tees and Cathal among a couple of my closest friends, really, because we've known each other for so long. We've done so much work together. We've been in each other's houses, you know, and it's always a pleasure to do something new with either of them. And it just so happens that this piece, this longest piece on the album, Species Counterpoint, was the first time that I'd been able to bring them together. I mean, they'd each heard me talk about the other for a long time, and they'd each were aware of the other, you know, through playing and Facebook and all those kind of things where people keep in touch. So it was really a really nice thing for me to have them play together on this new piece.
Cathal, can I come to you? I mean, you play a lot of music, a lot of Ian's music. You've had an improvisatory duo together, which took part in our Culture Night many years back. For you, what's the attraction in playing contemporary music?
Well, Ian has been one of the first attractions to playing contemporary music. I probably came across his music first of all at your archive, actually, on Fishamble Street. Along with a bunch of other composers. And for me, like initially, I think Ian's melody writing was something that I was attracted to. His sense of stillness, and I would say his earlier works even had well, perhaps still so, but particularly his earlier solo saxophone works had a sort of strong sort of sense of spirituality to them, a kind of a calming and reassuring voice, actually. So I found by playing those early pieces, that sort of gave me a voice to speak and to improvise from. And so I would have done a fair amount of improvising in the style of Ian Wilson. If you know, like channeling Ian's vocabulary, similar to maybe channeling other maybe jazz musicians.
That's really interesting that Ian's musical language is the improvisatory guide for you sometimes. Tees, can I come to you and specifically about this work, Species Counterpoint? It's the centerpiece of the album. It's the longest work. Can you tell me just a little bit about the part that you are performing in Species Counterpoint?
I've been playing Ian's music for quite a number of years now. I think since late 90s, and Ian's music is always evolving, and that's one of the most interesting, well, not most interesting, but one of the interesting parts about Ian's music. We played with the AMSO Quartet. When I was in the AMSO Quartet, we started with So Softly, and we just love this work. To this day, I think it's one of his best works. I think still, I don't think Ian will agree with that because it's so long ago, but I still love it. And I what Cathal said, I really hear the spiritual aspect of Ian's music in that piece. And Species Counterpoint is, for me, like a sort of combination between his later works. Ian wrote a piece for me for ensemble and saxophone soloist. Oh, this is really bad. Ian, what was the title again?
Oh, it's Array and Cathal, yeah?
Yeah, Array and Cathal, yeah, exactly. And that was a very motivic work, and we already noticed that in your Ghosts. Very motivic, while in So Softly you wrote bigger melodies and much longer lines. Even I think I remember 5/4, 6/4, 7/4 bars in a slow tempo, really big stretches of time. And you started to go smaller and smaller with the motives. And this piece does a little bit of both. It starts out with a motive of one bar, which evolves and things are added, and then suddenly it stops and it goes and from a couple of minutes to an extremely small motive. This motive becomes so small that they're like even two notes. And then also the more at about 6 minutes, I have the music here, so I'm reading it from the music, but there's a mournful part which is really like this. I don't know if you, Ian, it's like a sort of almost romantic sort of melody with really big intervals. It's really lovely. That's the first time I saw that.
Well, you know, there are some pieces I've written in the past where I've wanted to evoke a sense of nostalgia. So these passages would appear in maybe a couple of the early quartets where I'm specifically seeking a certain kind of feeling. And so I try and put myself back, you know, 100 years to the kind of late romantic language which was around then, because for me that's a musical kind of nostalgia, and it goes hand in hand with that melancholy feeling that maybe I'm aiming for at the time. So maybe there's some residue of that in this particular passage. Yeah, it's possible.
And I remember you did that also in Sarre and Cathal. You remember I asked you.
Well, I remember, yeah, I had the piece written, and T said, yeah, great, and that's really rocks, man, but could we maybe have a slow quiet bit just before the end? You know, normally I would just ignore that, but
exactly.
Since it was T's. So actually, well, I mean, I think I told you at the time what I did. I lifted the opening of the Berg violin concerto, and just dropped it right in there, because actually the request, I mean, the piece works better there's no doubt the piece works better with that in it. But the request was like a foreign body almost into what had already been made. So I wanted to actually physically do that, put a foreign body into the piece, like a Sean Scully painting, you know, those old paintings where he has a little square, which is a completely different pattern to the bigger square around that. And that's the kind of thing that I did now and again with certain pieces. So
right. Well, I do feel a strong connection with Ian's music, and wherever I play, I usually try to include Ian's work. With the residential orchestra, we did 3 works. You wrote Mother Funk, which is on this CD. We did the Saré, and
I did the first saxophone concerto as well. Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow?
Exactly, with the residential orchestra. Yeah. So and I feel very strongly connected to Ian's music, and I'm not really sure why, but it's really great music. And what I like about composers is when they have the guts to switch styles, when they have the guts to leave something that's apparently really successful, like So Softly, and go for something else.
Well, let's hear this strong connection that you talk about, Tees, and that you've referred to, Cathal, in the many years that you've engaged with Ian's music in this version of Species Counterpoint. Species Counterpoint from Ian Wilson's new release on the Diatribe label, Wild is the Wind, and performed there by Cathal, Roche and Mellema on baritone saxophones, and also for the tape part, which was created by Ian, and wonderful sounds of the Irish countryside, Ian. Very evocative, very atmospheric. And we'll move to another work on the CD, Ian, which is the title piece of the CD, Wild is the Wind. And it features the baritone saxophone also. No, it's actually for bass clarinet, and it's Gareth Davies playing this work. But we're going to hear a performance by the Spanish saxophonist Juan Martí Frasquer for baritone saxophone. So wonderful for us to kind of hear two versions. I've heard the bass clarinet version on the CD, and then this baritone saxophone version. You seem to have this great connection with the saxophone and with wind instruments.
Well, I've been very lucky, I think, in meeting a number of really great saxophonists in my career. Actually, the first one I met was Gerard McChrystal, my compatriot from the north. And I was just shortly after college, and I think I saw Jerry play in a chamber concert somewhere, and I just introduced myself to Jerry. And I said, "Listen, mate, you need me to write something for you," and that's actually what produced piece Drive for soprano sax and piano. And then I wrote another few pieces for Jerry, the solo piece, Secret Waking, and then the first concerto that Tees played later as well. And then through the Amstel Quartet, playing That So Softly, I got to know the guys, and Tees particularly, who was playing a lot as a soloist as well. Most of the other guys weren't. And then I met Cathal a few years later. So just, knowing these amazing players, and each of them having a different style and approach, it really broadened my horizons musically.
It was interesting that we were talking there about this romantic language that you sometimes go back to create this sense of nostalgia. I found sections of Wild is the Wind that were kind of creating that melancholy and nostalgia as well. And of course, it moves between these gorgeous lyrical parts to this kind of frantic parts, and then, parts where the mouthpiece is taken off for the more extended vocal techniques. And the piece will be quite well known to many people, of course, because it was recorded by Nina Simone and then later recorded by David Bowie. I suppose they're probably the best known versions. And you went to the Nina Simone version for your kind of, I suppose, musical inspiration.
I did. I'd been in touch with Gareth Davis for years, actually. It's just one of those things, you know, I can't even remember how we first got in touch, but we were every so often in communication about, you know, possibly doing something together. And then eventually Gareth said, well, listen, I have this ongoing series. Composers are reacting to jazz standards. So why don't you do one of those? So I asked my partner for a suggestion, and she's a big Nina Simone fan, and she suggested Wild as the Wind, which I actually didn't know. So I was delighted to get something I could be really objective about, and I just tried to deconstruct it as much as possible. So I think if you didn't know it was based on that tune, you probably wouldn't hear the tune in there, because it's really buried and deconstructed considerably. But I think something of the character or the spirit of that melody or that song remains somewhere. So those slower melancholy bits that you mentioned, those are very much me trying to get to the heart of what I hear in that piece. But the rest of it is trying to, I suppose, bring it into our time and reflect what's going on around us at the same time. So you have that dichotomy of something old, something new, trying to work together to, I suppose, be something different than it originally was.
Let's have a listen to this version of Wild as the Wind for baritone saxophone, and it's performed by Juan Martí Frasquer. One Marty Frasquire on baritone saxophone with Ian Wilson's Wild is the Wind, and a version for bass clarinet is featured on Ian's new release on the Diatribe Records, Wild is the Wind, and that's the title track of that release. Ian, you know, this is your third release on Diatribe Records, and Nick Roth, one of the co-directors behind that wonderful label, along with Matthew Jacobson. And so we asked Nick, I suppose, for some of his thoughts on your recordings on the Diatribe label.
Ian Wilson has a long-standing association with Diatribe Records, a relationship that began with his 2009 debut, Double Trio, and continued in 2014 with his monumental work for solo piano, Stations. His new record, released today, Wild is the Wind, shares some affinities with both of these earlier recordings, but I think it also opens a window onto some entirely new sonic terrain. One obvious parallel is that this disc marks another stage in his ongoing collaboration with saxophonist Cathal Roche, whose performance was so central to the music of the Double Trio. But going deeper, I also think that the two records share a kind of porousness in the way that the Double Trio explores and opens itself out onto speech patterns in the local area. Here, Species Counterpoint on the disc is an improvisatory response to environmental and interspecial sounds. We at Diatribe are also extremely happy to welcome some new voices to the catalogue, including saxophonist T.S. Mellema, flautist Fiona Kelly and clarinetist Gareth Davis, as well as the entire of Greg Caffrey's Hard Rain soloist ensemble. Strangely enough, I was first introduced to Ian's music through playing his amazing piece So Softly, also with Cathal in the Rise Saxophone Quartet back in 2005, which is also where I first encountered Greg Caffrey's music. So the circle is somehow completed here. And I'm finally particularly glad that this launch gives us an opportunity to finally release the last work on this disc, Knox, to the public. This piece was originally recorded for the Rodney Evenset sessions in Windmill Lane back in 2009, and I think it really captures a unique moment in time with some exceptional performances. So we'd like to say congratulations to all involved, and we very much hope that you enjoy listening to this music as much as we enjoyed making it.
Nick Roth of Diatribe Records. And this is it. This really gorgeous new release, Wild is the Wind. I'm absolutely delighted that we're launching it this evening, Ian. It's a really great honour, great pleasure. I wish we could all be here in the surrounds of the CMC library in person, but alas, we're continuing our online connection. And it's great to have Cathal and Tees with us from their respective places, locations. In your very interesting location, Cathal, in the background there of those very, very small speakers. I'm interested to know what you're working on at the moment.
What I'm surrounded in it by a shell of, or a dome of speakers here, which we actually used for our premiere of Species Counterpoint to the Model Arts in Sligo. So Ian had created a stereo soundtrack, and we were deciding what to do about that. And I said, well, is there any chance I could bring these 30 speakers along, and maybe we could spatialize the sounds and make it more immersive, which we did. It was a 3-day setup, and and then it was a takedown, and then it was a reset up, but we got through it. And for me, as an improviser, I think Ian's work was already very immersive, and you need to sort of go inwards to really understand what he's doing, and to understand or to find a place in that. And so the fact that Tees, who I've known Tees is playing for a long time, and the fact that he was also there in the room, but now Ian had sort of put him in as a if you like, a character or a being within a work that I was going into. And so this outward and inward simultaneous journey, being surrounded by the sound which is moving around us, I think the whole experience for me was a very primal one, in which really not knowing. I mean, I'm used to not knowing what I'm going to do in the moment. I mean, I've had Ian in quite nervous situations over going way back, because he just simply wouldn't know what was going to happen during his piece, and which is very different from the first time he heard myself and Nick play so softly. Because we asked him, well, is that it? And he said, yeah, that's it. That's basically it. And we were very surprised that he was very unimpressed and wasn't really commenting on or giving any artistic direction beyond, because his job was done, you see. So the fact that he was working with improvisers after that, it was quite interesting to see him so enlivened in the lead up to the performance. Everything's always in place, and so there was this kind of thing that could possibly go any direction, and it was very exciting for us both to share that. So in this piece, in Species Counterpoint, beyond that, I wasn't aware. I didn't even maybe understand my own reactions, because it brought me to a very deep place where I didn't know whether to perceive Tisa's part as a friendly, or as a foe, or as a threat, or as a possible collaborator, and I think it was just going between, I suppose, across the evolutionary spectrum, perhaps, where...
How did you see my part in the end, then?
I didn't know how the piece was going to finish, because we have this duo at the end, and we did a number of versions of it. So I would say every version was different, like a different possibility, or a different life, like a parallel lives that I had lived, you know. And so there was, but I do remember wondering whether I was going to kill you or you were going to kill me. I mean, we were, the whole concept of the piece of a Species Counterpoint, when you're talking about territory, which of course the soundtrack is very, very much evokes an unknown landscape, because we don't live in nature like this, and so I was really uncertain as to how we were going to finish, how I was going to survive, or what was going to happen.
Yeah, there was a very strong sense for me, this idea of survival. And I think, as you say, it could have gone any way at the end, but what we ended up with was the two of you have an improvised duet at the end once the soundtrack stops. And it's very much, when I listen to that, there's a lot of fight in it, but it's not with each other, it's together. It's like a struggle for survival. It's like a rage at the world almost, but it's a working together. That's what I take from it every time I hear that last bit.
I have a question for you, Ian. I remember we were talking about music and how to interpret music, and I remember you saying, if I write something, that's how it should be played. If I don't write a crescendo or decrescendo, there shouldn't be a crescendo or decrescendo. This was maybe 10, 15 years, maybe even longer ago. How does that connect with putting an improviser in your piece who can change the experience of the piece totally?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't change anything for you, mate.
No, not for me.
But
no.
Well, that's what was it that American guy Rumsfeld talked? That's the known unknown. So I know, working with Cathal for so long, what the potentialities are, and I very much wanted this to be a duet, the whole piece. Which would, if this isn't, I mean, it's not meant to sound condescending, but which would play to both of your strengths. So I wanted to write music piece for you that would really explore the range, your expressive and tonal range. And really, I wanted for Cathal to give you free rein to do, what you do, and to respond and to react. And we had quite a lot of conversations about the best way you felt you could do that. But ultimately, I think I was very happy with how the result turned out.
Can we talk about this free reign then that Cathal is allowed to have, and this very, very special improvisation we have that Cathal has created for this launch episode of the Salon, where he has improvised to "Wild is the Wind," and a great treat for listeners, because if you kind of listen to the bass clarinet version on the new release, and also we've heard the baritone saxophone version, and that's all coming from your musical brain, Ian. But I think there's probably a crossover of musical brains here, Cathal, because of what you said earlier of taking Ian's musical language and using it to improvise. So I'm really interested to know how you approached this improvisation.
This piece for me, because Ian had told me it was derived from a jazz standard, I sort of took that as the main point. I just sort of returned to that idea, and for me that for free improvisers, or when I'm improvising within Ian's work, which isn't always over a set of chord changes or anything. Sometimes it's a quarter tone melodic improvisation based on speech patterns, or sometimes it's multiphonics, sometimes it's noise, then there's the nature sounds. We've done work together where we've worked with, where Ian has just written a libretto. That's all he's done for a group of improvisers. So now I have sort of almost returning to where I first met Ian, through the music, through Drive actually that you mentioned earlier, through Jared McChrystal's amazing playing. That kind of more, I think of that piece as still very melodic, Wild is the Wind that he's written. And I taking that as I don't want to have I want to find a place that I could sort of drop into it. So without referencing the melody in any way, but just allowing myself to respond instinctively, and to allow myself to return to some of the jazz language that's another part of my practice, without any direct references to anything except the piece. So it's literally just a response to the piece itself, which I would have just listened to prior to the improvisation, and then I just allowed myself to react without too much control, including the aesthetic control of Ian's composing, if that makes sense.
Totally. Let's hear this very special improvisation in celebration of this new release, an improvisation from Cathal Roche of "Wild is the Wind."
Thank you.
Cathal Roche improvising on Wild is the Wind, and that special improvisation for this very special episode of the CMC Salon to launch a new release from composer Ian Wilson, Wild is the Wind, on the Diatribe label. And it's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you all this evening to launch this new release. Thank you so much, Ian, for sharing your thoughts on the works on this album. And of course, we only had time to discuss a few of the works. There are a good many others, and I highly recommend everyone to check this new release out, because it sounds gorgeous. It looks gorgeous, of course, and it sounds gorgeous, and wonderful playing and wonderful works from you, Ian. Thanks also to you, Cathal, and to Tees for sharing your thoughts on the many years that you've engaged with Ian's music. And very grateful for your time for this launch. And of course, the album itself is available on Diatribe Records, and all the information to order a hard copy or to purchase a digital download, all available from Diatribe Records website. And we'll have more CMC Salons over the coming weeks in November. Stay tuned to our social media and website for all the details of that. But for this evening, thanks for joining us for this first episode of the winter season of the CMC Salon.